my name is Hartley Dagador, and you're listening to Wake Up with Wonder podcast, where my daddy shares with you the gift of wonder.
All right, welcome back. Thank you so much to my beautiful daughter Hartley for the lovely introduction. My name is Jason B. Godoy, and I am the host of the Wake Up with Wonder podcast. It is my mission for this podcast to wake up the childlike curiosity of adults and to inspire wonder in all the mundane parts of life so that you may not only be able to begin seeing the wonder of the world around you, but you can also see the wonder within yourself and hopefully be inspired to take action on your wonders. Don't die wondering. They say that the biggest, most rich, wealthiest place in the whole entire world is the graveyard, because the graveyard is where everybody's wonders, everybody's dreams was buried and went to die. Don't let that be you. It is my intention for this podcast to create a safe container, a safe space where myself and the listeners can express our wonders. We can express the emotions, the feelings tied to these wonders. We can have an opportunity to create new perspectives, to see the unseen, and to create a plan that allows us to take action on our wonder. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. If you're a new listener, welcome. I am happy to have you here. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you giving me your time and your attention. I know it's your most valuable resource. If you're a returning listener, I appreciate your support. Happy to have you here. Please, if you haven't already, leave a iTunes review on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews are how we help spread the gift of wonder, how we help this show grow, and how we help other people who haven't heard about the podcast to learn about it and to find about it. So today's episode is going to be episode number 39, and it's definitely a touchy subject with everything going on in the world, all of the hate crimes, all of the racism, all of the segregation. I'm actually going to be sitting down and talking about racism today, but I'm going to propose it in a different light, in a different context. So before we dive into that, let me first off tell you, this episode is 100% sponsored and brought to you by the Wonders and Friends community. The Wonders and Friends community is our free and our paid community over on the Discord server. We share daily positivity, daily inspiration. We do a daily wonder, a daily perspective shift, and we're working on doing weekly in-depth coaching around the 4 core areas of life. So to learn more about the Wonders and Friends community, the sponsor of our show, you can visit bit.ly.com/wonders_friends. And to learn more about the podcast, feel free to visit wakeupwithwonder.com. And I won't take any more of your time. Let's dive right into the show. All right. Thank you. Welcome back to my listeners, soul family, friends, wanderers. So today is episode number 39, Wondering About Racism. And today we are going to talk about the sensitive topic of racism. I'm going to attempt to define the original definition. I'm going to attempt to provide a new supportive viewpoint of racism, an alternative viewpoint that makes it less scary, that makes it a less scary concept to stand up against, a less scary concept to acknowledge, and a less scary concept to fight. And then from there, I'm going to give you 10 steps that you can take to join and support the fight against racism. So first off, this concept of racism has been around for centuries, and it's back. It's knocking at the door of history. It's knocking at the door of our society. It's honestly barged its way through the door. It's here, it's in our face, and it's time we addressed it. So another reference for racism is racialism. And the conscious definition for racialism can be defined by a set of actions, practices, or beliefs that are reflective of the ideologies that make it justifiable for us to divide humans into these invisible categories of exclusively biological, in a sense, invisible containers called races. So due to the unconscious adapted behavioral traits and the specific cultural or behavioral features that some of us exhibit and others do not, there can be an underlying basis that there is superiority among some races and inferiority among other races. So do you see the problem where the segregation, where the division can arise from? The conscious definition of racism automatically separates us into categories. And because we are separated, we are unconscious to these specific behavioral traits, beliefs, and cultural factors that create underlying biases, that create underlying racism, underlying feelings of superiority and inferiority. Let's break racism down and make it even more simple. It's simply an expression of this human conflict that we have developed over time as a result of our evolved capacities to function together collectively in groups. So because we have to rely on our individual self, this automatic reliance on ourself defines everyone else that can be considered as a them within the framework of our world. So I'd like to be clear, them does not refer to a set of people, them does not refer to a race, them refers to the people that are other than ourselves in our world, in our current world. So as a result of society functioning within these groups, this conflict begins to arise when one group is classified as the outgroup. Usually the outgroup is operating from a place of love because they are different. And when we have an outgroup that's different, then there is generally an inverse group, which is the in-group, and the in-group is going to be the hate group. The hate group is a direct mirror image reflection of the out-group. So if the out-group is operating from a place of love, the in-group is operating from a place of hate. By expressing racism in this matter of love and hate, it eliminates the notion of right and wrong. It automatically boils racism down to this concept of good and evil. Now, from this viewpoint of good and evil, we can simply define racism as fear and greed. And I like to define fear as unearned power. So if the hate group or the out group is operating from a place of fear and operating from this place of greed, these behaviors can become toxic and they can even become addictive. This hate group never gets enough material objects. They're on a relentless quest for fulfillment and a relentless pursuit for wealth. But what they really crave and what they fear to truly have is something that can't not be bought with greed. These haters or these racists are chasing power. They're chasing wealth. But their heart really desires love. Their heart desires intimacy, connection. Their heart desires self-acceptance, and it desires rich relationships, similar to those things that the love or the in-group would already have. Now, because one group, the hate group, secretly desires all these things that the other group, the love group, has, and they don't have the equity or the means to achieve or acquire said things, that leads to division, to segregation, to separation, ultimately defined as racism. So now that we have a new definition, a new viewpoint for racism, how can we approach racism differently? We have the power, we have the opportunity to be the change that we want to see in the world. And I hope to give you some tips right now in this podcast episode so you can begin to think about how you're going to do that. First and foremost, when it comes to racism, it comes to stereotypes. There is a difference between prejudice and racism. In order to understand the difference, there is a website I will link to in the show notes called Understanding Prejudice. But in order to see if you have a unconscious, subconscious, underlying notion or perspective of racism that you're unaware of, there's a test that you can take. It's called the IAT, the Implicit Association Test between Black and White Race. So I've taken the test myself, and I will link the place where you can take the test in the show notes as well. But basically, this is a test where it separates makes two distinct categories. There's European American and there's African American. And this test on the computer is going to present you with objects or concepts. It can be pictures, just the faces of European Americans. It can be the pictures of African Americans. It can be positive words like good, joy, happy. It can be negative words like sad, angry, agony. And what we're to do is we are to separate the images of European Americans and African Americans into their respective category, European American or African American. And then we're supposed to separate these terms into their respective categories of good and bad. Now, halfway through this test, it gets flipped, and good is no longer associated with European American. It's rather good becomes associated with African American, and bad becomes associated with European American. At this point is when it gets very interesting, because our brain wants to continue associating terms like joyous, happy, peaceful, all these positive terms with the European American category, even though that is now the bad category. And our brain wants to associate the negative terms like agony, anger, defeat with the African American category, even though it is now the good category. So at this point, we have to be highly conscious and highly aware in order to not associate these terms or these images with the wrong category subconsciously. And after taking the test, you will get your results. The way they score the test is there's a strong automatic preference for white people, there's a strong automatic preference for Black people, all the in-betweens, and then there's neutral, which is little or no automatic preference. I found it interesting that 48% of people who took the test fall in the strong automatic preference for white people category. Only 6% of people who took the test fall in strong automatic preference for Black people category. And then I myself fell right in the neutral zone with 12% of the population, and that is little or no automatic preference for either race. So that's the first way that we can really gauge our underlying subconscious thoughts and behaviors towards racism, and gauge whether or not we have, I don't even want to say racist, we have hateful tendencies. So that's one way. Another way this can be done is simply by understanding and by acknowledging this concept of white privilege. So first off, as a man, I do believe in male privilege, and I do believe in unacknowledged male privilege. So lots of men say that we do not have privileges as a man, and I believe because men fail to acknowledge their male privilege, then it automatically puts them in a position of unearned power or a position of fear. Whereas when we recognize our male privilege, then we are no longer an oppressor. We are no longer unfairly advantaged. Rather, we are in a position of earned power, a position of conscious control, conscious decision-making, conscious enforcement. Now, this same unacknowledged male privilege, I believe, goes for racism or hate and love as well, and there is an unacknowledged white privilege. So let me first off say that I'm not white. I am Hispanic. I am Latino American. I am first generation American citizen, but I am not white. Now, my entire life, I have been culturally, ethnically ambiguous. I've been able to fit in with Hispanic groups. I've been able to fit in with white cultures. I've been able to fit in with multiple cultures pretty easily, including a few times I've been asked if I was part black, and I fit in with African American cultures. So I believe because of that, it is easier for me to see this notion of white privilege and to acknowledge it. Because for other people, it truly is something that goes unacknowledged. But in order to do something about white privilege, we first need to acknowledge it. So I would say that growing up every day in life, I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness. I wasn't taught to view racism as an invisible system that was conferring dominance on specific social groups, but rather individual acts of meanness. Now, if we look at racism as individual acts of meanness, then it's easy to do nothing about it. It's easy to ignore it, but it's also easy to hold ourselves accountable and to speak up and stop racism when we see it happening, or to stop hate crimes when we see them happening. Now, when we look at racism or even hate crimes as this invisible system that is conferring dominance on a social group, it allows us to really look at this notion of white privilege, and it allows us to see how white privilege can be used to benefit, to further the movement, the cause of hate, the cause of racism, can be used to support it, to bring awareness to it. And the example I want to give for this is basically there's daily privileges that we're unaware of. Once we become aware of them, it shines light on them, and then we can go about our day of just being conscious. So our school system, it trained us to view ourselves, if you're white, as an oppressor, as an unfairly advantaged person. It almost made us feel like parts of culture are damaged, and we're just participating in damaged culture. I was taught to see myself as an individual whose moral peace, moral happiness wasn't dependent on anybody else. It was dependent on my own moral will. But in doing so, it kept me from seeing everyone else's moral will and moral happiness. And as I've become older, I've been able to see that more and more clearly. Another way, besides acknowledging white privilege and using white privilege as a way to combat, to support, to further the movement of love, I want to say, another way to help reduce racism and to minimize this notion of hate in the world is by mindfulness. Really, mindfulness, it goes back to the concept of bad and good. It allows us to slow down, to be in the moment, and to really think about any negative implications that might be caused or resulting from a specific behavior. Mindfulness just allows us to be completely aware of our triggers, of any sudden, knee-jerk, reactive behaviors that could harm individuals closest to us. So I'd like to propose that mindfulness be taught to our children as a means to just give them a strong foundation so that they can keep these triggers in check, so that as we get older, we are more conscious and more aware of our interactions with the world around us. Another I guess, consequence of racism, of hate, is that it's a tool for separation. It's a tool for division. So it also separates us from the divine power of the universe. It separates us from the power of divinity. It separates us from our Creator, from love, from any spiritualityness that you may have. Racism really gets in the way, because when we have hate in our hearts, when we're experiencing hate, we can't connect to a higher being. We can't connect to a higher power the way that we should. So as I wrapped up, I just want to give you 10 steps that you can use to combat these hate crimes, to combat what racism really is, hate. So first is to act. We can literally do something in the face of hatred. If we're apathetic and we just sit back and choose to be neutral, it can be viewed or interpreted as being accepting of this behavior. The public, the perpetrators, the victims, everyone can choose to view your passive behavior, your apathetic behavior, as accepting the racist, the hateful the attitudes. So it's important that we take action. Even messy action is better than no action. Another thing we can do, number 2, is join forces. We are more powerful in numbers. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this, our individual experiences, our individual need to support and protect ourselves within the framework of our world automatically creates a them, creates a other. The them, the other in our world has no specific definition. The them, the other can be anyone and everyone. So who we choose to join forces with will also help to determine the them and the other in our world. So in terms of racism, a lot of people view them as the opposite race, the opposite skin color. But if we're choosing to join forces, to ally with said individuals, they are no longer them. They are a part of us. They are part of we. They become a part of our group. Now they are in the loving group. We are in the loving group with them. A third thing we can do is support the victims. When I say support the victims, whoever is a victim of a hate crime, they don't want advice. They don't want you to tell them how they feel. They don't want you to point them in the direction of someone who's going to make them feel better. All they want you to do, literally, is listen. That's the best way to support them. Number 4 is to speak up. The longer hate goes untalked about, goes unnoticed, goes unheard, then the worse hate is going to become, and the more that hate is going to build up and stack up. So we need to speak up on hate. Number 5 is to educate ourselves. It's so important that we come from a place of knowledge and education and understanding, because if not, we can easily become ignorant, be made to be viewed as a bigot, and honestly just fall into that racist category of haters. Number 6 is to create an alternative. So there's rallies, there's protests, there's all these things going on, but you can't fight hate with hate. We need to find other healthy outlets for anger, other healthy outlets for frustration. And if we have a desire to do something, there's positive ways to do that. We can hold peace rallies, we can hold unity rallies, we can hold peace parades, and we can just think of other creative ways that are intended to draw the media away from the hate, to draw the media attention away from hate, and to put the attention of the media on love, on positivity. That's the 6th option. The 7th thing we can do to combat hate and racism is to pressure leaders. So in our society, we have elected officials, we have governors, we have police chiefs, we have prosecutors, we have district attorneys, we have all these elected officials that are able to take a stand, that are able to speak for us Sometimes if you have the direct access, the direct connection to them, they might just need a push. They might just need encouragement in order to do that, to be the voice for the people. Number 8, stay engaged. There's nothing worse than being disconnected during times of racism, times of turmoil, times of hate, times of trouble. I know that sometimes it's necessary to take a step back from the hate and to disengage ourselves. But once you are refueled, once you are replenished, once you are stronger, then we really need to engage ourselves again. We need to really reach out and connect with people outside of our comfort groups, and we need to start gaining new perspective and new understandings for this whole ordeal. Number 9 is to teach acceptance. So social biases are created at an early age. Social biases start in the home. So we have the power to teach acceptance to the younger generation, to teach social acceptance, to teach social understanding, to teach that diversity is normal, diversity is okay, and diversity is accepted. And then the last thing we can do, which really possibly should be the first thing, is to dig deep within inside of ourselves. We need to look inside of ourselves for biases, for stereotypes, and ultimately make a commitment to disrupting this flow of hate in the world. If there's hate at home, if there's intolerance at home, we need to look deep within ourselves. We need to remove the hate from our hearts. Then we can address the hate within our homes, the intolerance within our homes. And then from there, we can start to have a greater impact. From addressing the hate in our homes, ideally, your children would see that. Your children would begin to address hate, address intolerance, and stand up against those things in their school. And then from there, you can take this new stand, this new spirit of love and spirit of confrontation, positive confrontation. You could take that to your workplace. You could take that into other communities that you're a part of. And that is really how we come together and communally have a greater impact and a greater effect on this concept of hate and racism, is by starting with ourselves, looking inside of ourselves, removing it from our hearts, removing it from our homes, removing it from the sectors that we're affiliated with, and then it will slowly but surely grow and evolve and remove itself from the world. So thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to listen today. This episode definitely went longer than usual because I wanted to get clear. I wanted to help give you guys a clear understanding of racism. I wanted to give you a new perspective, a new understanding of it as a love and hate relationship. I wanted to give you some tools about how you can act on it, about how you can become more conscious, more aware. I wanted to give you a test that you can take so you can see if you are consciously or subconsciously racist or hateful towards certain groups of people, if you have unconscious prejudices. I wanted to give you a list of 10 tools that you can use to stop hate crimes, to respond to hate, and to minimize hate in the world, because hate is such a huge thing in the world. All we can do is love more, and that's what this podcast is all about, is giving us new perspectives, new capacities, new ways, new tools to love and to connect with ourselves and with the world around us. If you enjoyed today's show, if you enjoyed today's episode, I'd like to ask that you share it with a friend. If you know anyone who's experiencing racism, who is unaware of their own white privilege, share this podcast with them. This simple podcast can bring so much awareness and change racism for somebody. I don't know who, but I really hope that this affects somebody positively and changes their life for the better. That this brings, maybe it's somebody who is racist, and maybe this will just flip their heart from that cold, dark place of hate to a nice, bright, shining place of light and love. If you've listened for a while, drop a review on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts. If you want to learn more about the show, visit our website, wakeupwithwonder.com. And to be a part of our private or free community where you will receive daily content, daily support, daily positivity, accountability, you can visit bit.ly/wanderers_friends. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you next week on Wonder Wednesday. And just know that really this fight against hate, this fight against racism, this demand for social change, this demand to stop social injustice starts with you, starts in your heart, goes to your home, and from your home it expands out into the communities closest to you, it expands into the world. But it really starts with you. Your ability to have an impact on your children is going to have an impact on future generations. So be the change you want to see in the world. And before I leave, my last question to you is, now that you know about racism, now that you know about white privilege, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to show up? How are you going to respond differently so that it doesn't have an effect, a direct effect on anyone else? I love you guys. Have a powerful day. Have a wonderful day. Wake up with wonder. Take care.